2 years felt both like an eternity and a single searing moment when Rebecca Guzman heard a familiar mocking laugh in the distance. "Not married yet?" her ex had once sneered, a sound that still echoed in her guarded heart. The autumn of 1818 had been the season of Rebecca Guzman's greatest hopes and deepest humiliation. At 20 years of age, Miss Rebecca Guzman, eldest daughter of Don Eduardo Guzman, a respectable gentleman of modest estates in Hampshire, had entered London society with carefully tempered expectations. Her father's holdings were honorable but diminished by poor investments, her dowry adequate but unremarkable. She possessed what her aunt called quiet, striking beauty, rich dark hair that fell in waves against porcelain skin, eyes of penetrating intelligence that seemed to perceive more than they revealed, and an elegance of bearing that came from genuine refinement rather than affected airs. She had not expected to capture the attention of Jude Morales, one of the most sought-after gentlemen in London society. Son of a prosperous merchant family recently elevated to gentility, Jude possessed the kind of handsome, confident charm that drew admiration from every corner of a ballroom. Yet he had pursued Rebecca with a focused determination that had set the gossips of Mayfair ablaze with speculation. He had claimed her first waltz at the Pemberton Ball, had driven her through Hyde Park in his gleaming phaeton, had engaged her in conversations about literature and philosophy that stretched into hours. He had made her believe, foolish girl that she was, that he saw something in her beyond her family's fading fortunes. "You possess genuine substance, Miss Guzman," he had told her one afternoon in the Guzman drawing-room, his dark eyes warm with apparent sincerity. "So many young ladies concern themselves only with ribbons and reputation. You are different. You are exceptional." She had allowed herself to hope, to dream, to imagine a future as Mrs. Morales, not for his family's wealth, but because she had genuinely believed Jude valued her for herself. Then Miss Arabella Thornton had arrived in London. The only daughter of Sir Marcus Thornton, whose vast estates in Derbyshire had made him one of the wealthiest landowners in England, Arabella brought with her a dowry of £60,000 and her father's ruthless ambition to see her marry well. She was beautiful in the obvious way, golden ringlets, china blue eyes, and a figure that commanded attention from every gentleman she passed. Rebecca had watched Jude's devotion shift with the speed of a compass needle approaching magnetic north. Within a fortnight, he was dancing attendance on Miss Thornton. Within a month, he was calling on her family daily. Then, at the Duchess of Lennox's masquerade ball, one of the grandest events of the season, Jude had approached Rebecca as she stood near the terrace doors, seeking air. "Miss Guzman," he had said, his tone carefully calibrated to sound regretful, yet pitched just loudly enough that several nearby guests could hear. "I must be honest with you, Miss Guzman," he continued, adjusting his cravat with studied casualness. "While I hold you in considerable regard, I have come to realize that a man of my position must make a match that advances his family's standing. I am certain you understand the practicalities of such situations." The humiliation had seared through her like a brand. Not merely the rejection, she might have borne that privately, but the calculated public nature of it, the way he had essentially announced to society that she was insufficient, that her modest dowry and respectable but unremarkable connections made her unworthy of his continued interest. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Morales," she had managed to say, her voice steady despite the mortification flooding her veins. "I thank you for your clarity." She had maintained her composure through the remainder of the ball, had even danced twice more, though she could not afterward recall with whom. But when she returned home that night, she had wept until the first light of dawn touched her window. Within 6 weeks, Jude Morales's engagement to Miss Arabella Thornton was announced in the Times. That had been 2 years ago. 2 years during which Rebecca had reconstructed herself with deliberate, painstaking care. She had returned to London for the subsequent seasons, but now she approached society with clear eyes and an armored heart. She conversed politely, danced when propriety required, and deflected questions about her matrimonial prospects with practiced deflection. She had received a few offers: a widowed baronet of advancing years, a country clergyman with more earnestness than charm, a younger son seeking a competent wife to manage his modest household. She had declined them all. If she must marry for practical considerations rather than romantic inclination, and her mother reminded her with increasing frequency that at 22 she was rapidly approaching the dreaded status of confirmed spinster, then she would at least ensure the match provided genuine security and dignity. She had not expected a proposal from Darius Macpherson, the Duke of Crestwood. The Duke was a legend in English society, though not the romantic sort that inspired sighs from impressionable young ladies. At 33, he had held his title for 15 years, since his father's death when Darius was merely 18. He had inherited a dukedom mired in scandal and financial difficulty, and had transformed it through brilliant management and absolute discipline into one of the most powerful estates in England. He was known for his formidable intelligence, his considerable political influence, and his complete unwillingness to tolerate incompetence or artifice. He attended social functions as duty demanded, but remained distinctly aloof, dancing once or twice per evening out of obligation, conversing only when absolutely necessary. His dark hair, striking features, and tall, commanding presence made him objectively handsome, but his reputation for cold precision ensured that most young ladies found him intimidating rather than appealing. Whispers followed him through ballrooms. "Ice runs in Crestwood's veins," they said. He would sooner negotiate a treaty than speak a word of affection. Rebecca had encountered him only 3 times before he called upon her father. The first occasion had been at a political dinner hosted by Lord Castlereagh, where Rebecca had accompanied her parents.
The third encounter occurred at Lord Pemberton's interminable dinner party, an affair notable only for its excessive courses and insufferably dull conversation. Rebecca had been seated between a pompous MP who spoke exclusively about tariff reform and an elderly baronet whose hearing had deteriorated to the point where conversation required shouting. She had resigned herself to an evening of profound tedium when she felt the weight of observation and looked up to find the Duke of Crestwood's penetrating gaze fixed upon her from across the table. He did not smile or look away when their eyes met. He simply observed her with the same analytical attention one might give to a painting being considered for purchase, then returned his attention to his plate with perfect composure. After dinner, as the ladies prepared to withdraw and leave the gentlemen to their port, the Duke did something unprecedented. He intercepted Rebecca in the corridor outside the drawing-room with a directness that left no room for pretense. "Miss Guzman, I require a word with you in private. The library will suffice." It was not a request. Rebecca glanced toward the drawing-room where the other ladies were gathering, then back at the Duke's impassive expression. Every rule of propriety screamed against entering a private room unchaperoned with any gentleman, let alone the Duke of Crestwood, yet something in his manner suggested this was a matter of business rather than impropriety. "Very well, Your Grace." The library was a masculine room of dark wood and leather, lit by a single branch of candles. The Duke closed the door, but remained standing near it, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow made the situation feel less scandalous and more like a negotiation. He wasted no time on preliminaries. "I am in need of a wife, Miss Guzman. I believe you would be suitable for the position." Rebecca blinked, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "A wife," he repeated, with the same tone one might use to discuss hiring a steward. "I require a duchess who can manage extensive households, navigate society with intelligence rather than frivolity, and provide the dukedom with heirs. I do not require romance, poetry, or protestations of affection. I require competence, discretion, and mutual respect." The sheer audacity of it rendered Rebecca momentarily speechless.
This was not a proposal. This was a business proposition, delivered with all the warmth of a contract negotiation. "Your Grace, I am not certain whether to be insulted or intrigued." For the first time, something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Intrigued would be preferable. "I chose my words deliberately, Miss Guzman. I have observed you over our 3 meetings. You possess considerable intelligence, which you take care to disguise in company to avoid appearing threatening. You manage conversations with grace, while clearly finding most of them tedious. You have rejected multiple suitors despite your mother's obvious anxiety about your unmarried state, suggesting you have principles and will not settle for inadequacy." Rebecca felt exposed, as though he had somehow read her private journals. "You have been remarkably attentive, Your Grace. I am attentive to everything that concerns me. I am also aware of your unfortunate experience with Jude Morales 2 years past." The name struck like a physical blow. Rebecca stiffened, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "I fail to see how that is relevant to this conversation." "It is entirely relevant," Darius said, his tone softening by a barely perceptible degree, "because it means you understand, as I do, that marriage based on romantic illusions is a fool's gamble. Morales made you pretty promises and discarded you when financial advantage presented itself. He was a weak man who disguised his weakness with charm." The brutal honesty of it cut through Rebecca's defenses. No one had ever spoken of her humiliation so directly, without pity or judgment, simply stating it as a fact. "I am not a weak man, Miss Guzman," the Duke continued. "I do not make promises I cannot keep. I offer you security, position, and my absolute protection as the Duchess of Crestwood. I offer you respect and honesty. I will not lie to you, abandon you, or humiliate you. What I will not offer is romantic sentiment or emotional declarations I do not feel." Rebecca studied him in the candlelight, this formidable man who spoke of marriage as though negotiating a treaty. There was something almost refreshing in his complete lack of artifice. "And what would you require of me, Your Grace?" "My intelligence in managing my households, your presence at social functions as befits a duchess, an heir in time, your discretion, and your loyalty. In return, you would become the highest-ranking woman in England outside the royal family. You would want for nothing, and you would have my word, which I have never broken, that you would be treated with honor." Rebecca's mind raced. This was not the proposal she had once dreamed of, but dreams, she had learned, were dangerous things. "You offer me dignity over love," she said quietly. "I offer you certainty over pretty lies," he countered. "I believe you are intelligent enough to recognize the value of that distinction."
Rebecca stood in the library's shadows, feeling the weight of the Duke's proposal settle over her like a mantle. 2 years ago, she would have fled from such cold pragmatism, would have clung to her romantic ideals and waited for a man who spoke of love. 2 years ago, she had been a different woman. "I would like time to consider your offer, Your Grace." "Of course. I will call upon your father in 3 days for your answer." He opened the door with perfect propriety, allowing her to exit first. As Rebecca returned to the drawing-room, she felt the other ladies' curious glances, but could not bring herself to care about their speculation. That night she sat by her bedroom window long after the house had fallen silent, turning the Duke's proposal over in her mind like a puzzle box. There was no poetry in his offer, no declaration that she was exceptional or different. Yet paradoxically, his very lack of flattery felt more honest than any pretty words Jude Morales had ever spoken. Darius had not promised to love her, but he had promised never to lie to her, never to abandon her, never to humiliate her. Were those not, in their own way, more valuable than protestations of affection that could evaporate when a wealthier prospect appeared? She thought of the suitors she had rejected, men who offered middling security and tepid regard. She thought of her mother's increasingly anxious hints about spinsterhood. She thought of the pitying glances she still occasionally received at social functions, the whispered reminders of the girl Jude Morales had deemed insufficient. As Duchess of Crestwood, she would never receive such glances again. The realization crystallized with startling clarity. This was not a fairy tale proposal. It was something far more valuable, a genuine offer from a man of proven capability and unshakable honor. Darius had transformed a failing dukedom through sheer competence. He wielded more influence than men twice his age. He was offering her not the uncertainty of emotion, but the certainty of position and protection. It was, Rebecca realized, a triumph of logic over wounded sentiment, and perhaps logic was precisely what she needed. When the Duke called 3 days later, Rebecca received him in the drawing room with her father present. She met Darius's steady gaze and saw neither anxiety nor expectation there, only patient attention. "Your Grace," she said clearly, "I accept your proposal." Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or approval. He inclined his head with grave formality. "Then I am honored, Miss Guzman. I shall arrange the settlements immediately and procure a special license. I see no reason for delay." No reason for delay and no pretty words of joy or devotion, simply efficiency and forward motion. Rebecca found she preferred it that way. Pretty words, after all, had proven unreliable. A duke's word, however, was binding. The marriage settlements were presented to Rebecca's father within a week, and their generosity left even the stoic Don Eduardo visibly shaken. The Duke had provided a widow's portion so substantial that Rebecca would be independently wealthy should he predecease her. He had allocated funds for her personal use that exceeded what most gentlemen earned in a year. He had even settled a modest sum on Rebecca's younger sister, ensuring her future prospects would be considerably improved. "He is being extraordinarily fair," her father said, reviewing the documents in his study while Rebecca sat across from him. "More than fair. These terms are exceptional, Rebecca." Rebecca noted that her father did not mention love or happiness, only fairness and financial security. Perhaps he too had learned that the latter proved more reliable than the former. The betrothal period lasted a mere 10 days. There were no engagement balls, no public announcements in the society pages, no lengthy courtship for the gossips to dissect. The Duke had procured a special license, and he intended to use it with characteristic efficiency. "I see no purpose in prolonged spectacle," he told Rebecca during one of their 3 brief, chaperoned meetings before the wedding. "We have reached an agreement. The formalities should be concluded expeditiously." Rebecca found his businesslike approach oddly comforting. There would be no performance of romance, no pretense of emotions neither of them claimed to feel, just a contract being executed by 2 rational parties. The wedding took place on a gray morning in late April at the Duke's private chapel at Crestwood House. The guest list was ruthlessly limited. Rebecca's parents and sister, the Duke's cousin who served as witness, and the clergyman. No society matrons to whisper and speculate, no elaborate breakfast to endure, simply the ceremony itself, stripped of all ornament. Rebecca wore a gown of pale blue silk, elegant but not bridal white. She carried no flowers. When she entered the chapel on her father's arm, the Duke stood waiting with the same composed expression he might wear to a political meeting. He was dressed impeccably in dark formal wear, but there was nothing in his bearing to suggest this was anything but another obligation to be fulfilled. The ceremony progressed with swift efficiency. The clergyman's words seemed to echo in the small space as Rebecca made her vows in a steady voice. When Darius spoke his vows in return, his tone was firm and clear, each word deliberate. This was a contract being sealed, a bargain being formalized. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The Duke did not kiss her. He simply inclined his head with grave courtesy, offered her his arm, and escorted her to the vestry to sign the register. Rebecca took the pen with fingers that did not tremble. She had signed her name 1,000 times before, but never this name. The ink flowed smoothly as she wrote with careful precision.
Rebecca Macpherson, Duchess of Crestwood. Not Rebecca Guzman, the girl who had been publicly rejected and humiliated. Not Miss Guzman, the aging spinster whose prospects diminished with each passing season. Rebecca Macpherson, Duchess of Crestwood, one of the highest-ranking women in England. She felt no surge of love as she set down the pen, no romantic joy or girlish excitement. What she felt was something far more substantial: relief, security, and a quiet sense of triumph. She had chosen dignity over sentiment, and she had chosen well. The Duke signed his own name below hers with equal efficiency, then turned to her with that same measured expression. "Your Grace," he said, and she realized with a start that he was addressing her by her new title. "Shall we?"
3 days of marriage passed in what Rebecca could only describe as carefully maintained formality. They dined together each evening, conversing with the polite courtesy of diplomatic allies. Darius conducted estate business during the day, while Rebecca familiarized herself with the staggering complexity of managing a ducal household. They had separate bedchambers, and the Duke had made no move to claim his marital rights, a circumstance Rebecca found both relieving and oddly disconcerting. On the third afternoon, Darius summoned her to his study. "The Countess of Barrington is hosting her annual ball tomorrow evening," he said without preamble. "We will attend." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "So soon, Your Grace?" "Darius," he corrected. "We are married, Rebecca. Formality in private is unnecessary." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that penetrating gaze. "And yes, immediately. Society must see us together. They must understand that you are the Duchess of Crestwood, and that you have my full support and protection. Delay would suggest uncertainty or shame. We have neither." There was strategic wisdom in his reasoning, Rebecca recognized, even as her pulse quickened at the thought of facing society so soon, facing him, because Jude Morales would certainly be there. "I have taken the liberty of having the Crestwood jewels brought from the vault. My mother's lady's maid has come out of retirement to serve you. She will ensure you are appropriately attired." The following evening, Rebecca stood before her mirror and barely recognized herself. The gown was a masterpiece of deep crimson silk that draped elegantly across her shoulders and fell in lustrous folds to the floor. But it was the jewels that transformed her into something otherworldly. The Crestwood diamonds blazed at her throat, a magnificent collar of stones so large and flawless they seemed to capture and multiply the candlelight. Matching earrings hung heavy at her ears. A tiara that had graced the heads of duchesses for 3 generations rested in her dark hair like a crown. "You look every inch a duchess, Your Grace," the lady's maid said with satisfaction. When Rebecca descended the stairs, she found Darius waiting in the entrance hall. For the first time since she had met him, she saw a flicker of something other than cool assessment in his eyes, a brief spark of what might have been approval, or perhaps possession. "The jewels suit you," he said simply, offering his arm. The carriage ride to Barrington House was silent, but Rebecca felt the Duke's solid, commanding presence beside her like an anchor. When they arrived, she could hear the music and laughter spilling from the brilliantly lit windows. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirts. "Rebecca," Darius's voice was quiet but firm, "you are the Duchess of Crestwood. There is not a woman in that ballroom who outranks you. Remember that." She lifted her chin, drawing strength from the cool certainty in his tone. "I will." They entered together, and the major domo's voice rang out across the suddenly quieting ballroom. "His Grace the Duke of Crestwood, and Her Grace the Duchess of Crestwood." The effect was instantaneous. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned in unison. Rebecca felt hundreds of eyes fix upon her, with expressions ranging from shock to envy to calculation. Her pulse quickened at the thought of facing society so soon, facing him, because Jude Morales would certainly be there. "His Grace the Duke of Crestwood, and Her Grace the Duchess of Crestwood." The effect was instantaneous.
Conversations died mid-sentence, heads turned in unison. Rebecca felt hundreds of eyes fix upon her with expressions ranging from shock to envy to calculation. She heard the whispers begin, a rippling wave of astonishment spreading through the crowd. Crestwood? Married? When? Who is she? My God, those are the Crestwood diamonds. Darius guided her into the ballroom with his hand resting possessively at the small of her back, nodding with ducal indifference to the bowing and curtsying crowd. Rebecca kept her spine straight and her expression serene, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She saw them almost immediately. Jude Morales stood near the refreshment table, resplendent in evening dress with a top hat tucked under his arm, his handsome face animated as he spoke with a cluster of gentlemen. Beside him, his wife Arabella looked as lovely as ever, in pale pink silk, her golden curls gleaming in the candlelight. Rebecca felt the old wound pulse with remembered pain, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She was not the humiliated girl anymore. She was the Duchess of Crestwood. Jude's gaze swept the room and landed on her. She watched recognition dawn, followed by confusion, then something uglier, a flash of bitter resentment quickly masked by his practiced charm. He excused himself from his companions and began moving through the crowd toward her with that same confident stride she remembered too well. Rebecca's mouth went dry. "Your Grace, if you'll excuse me for a moment," the Duke said, releasing her arm. "Lord Barrington wishes to discuss a parliamentary matter. Will you be quite well?" It was terrible timing, but Rebecca could not appear dependent or frightened. "Of course." The Duke moved away just as Jude reached her, positioning himself directly in her path with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Guzman," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, deliberately using her maiden name. "What a surprise to see you here. I had not realized you moved in such elevated circles these days." The insult was carefully crafted, implying she was out of place, that she had somehow crashed a ball above her station. Rebecca felt heads turning, people leaning in to hear. "Though I suppose one must broaden one's social sphere when prospects become limited," Jude continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. His eyes swept over her gown and jewels with theatrical confusion. "Borrowed finery for the occasion? How resourceful." Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but Jude stepped closer, his voice dropping to a carrying whisper designed to wound. "Tell me honestly, Miss Guzman," he said, with that familiar mocking laugh that had haunted her for 2 years. "Tell me, still not married yet?" The cruelty of it stole her breath.
He knew. He had to have heard the announcement. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation, an attempt to reduce her once more to that heartbroken girl at the Duchess of Lennox's ball. The cruelty of Jude's words stole Rebecca's breath, leaving her speechless, exposed, and trembling on the precipice of a familiar humiliation. Just as her carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter, a solid, possessive hand settled on her bare arm, anchoring her. The touch was firm, cool, and unmistakably powerful. "Mr. Morales," a voice calm and deep cut through the sudden hush that had fallen over the small cluster of onlookers. Jude, momentarily thrown by the interruption, turned, his smirk faltering as he met the Duke of Crestwood's unwavering gaze. Darius stood beside Rebecca, his tall frame radiating an aura of absolute command. His fingers remained a warm, solid weight on her arm, a silent declaration of ownership. "It seems," Darius continued, his voice devoid of anger, yet colder than any public display of fury could have been, "you are laboring under a grave misapprehension." His eyes, the color of storm clouds, drifted to Rebecca's face for a fleeting moment, a subtle shift that was almost imperceptible, then returned to Jude. "Allow me to rectify your oversight. You are speaking to my wife, Her Grace, the Duchess of Crestwood." A gasp rippled through the small crowd. Jude's face, which had been so confidently animated moments before, drained of color. He visibly recoiled, his jaw going slack. Arabella, who had been approaching from behind him, stopped dead, her china blue eyes wide with shock. Darius didn't wait for a reply. Indeed, one would imagine a man of your supposed societal discernment would keep abreast of such significant developments, though perhaps, he added, a faint, almost imperceptible curl of his lip, some circles are simply too elevated for news of this magnitude to reach them in a timely fashion. The blow was precise, devastating, and delivered with surgical elegance. It wasn't just a correction, it was a public execution of Jude Morales' standing, an implicit accusation of his lack of consequence, his former connection to Rebecca reduced to the forgotten gossip of lesser men. Every word Darius spoke reinforced Rebecca's absolute superiority in rank and security. Rebecca felt a surge of adrenaline, not of fear, but of an exhilarating, almost dizzying triumph. The weight of Jude's taunt, the years of quiet shame lifted from her shoulders. She was not the girl he had discarded. She was the Duchess of Crestwood, and the man beside her had just, with calm, deliberate power, dismantled her tormentor. Jude, utterly mortified, stammered, "Your Grace, I beg your pardon. I had no idea." "Clearly," Darius interjected, cutting him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. Then he turned his full attention to Rebecca, his voice softening by a fraction, though still perfectly audible. "Rebecca, my dear, I believe Lord and Lady Barrington are waiting to formally receive us. Shall we?" He offered her his arm with impeccable grace, his earlier possessive grip on her arm transforming into a gesture of tender proprietorship. Rebecca, her chin held high, placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. As they turned away, leaving a stunned and humiliated Jude Morales frozen in their wake, Rebecca felt the whispers behind them shift. They were no longer about her past, but about her dazzling, unassailable present.
They moved through the ballroom, Darius guiding her with an unspoken promise of unwavering support. Heads continued to turn, but now the whispers were laced with awe, not speculation or pity. Rebecca felt an almost dizzying sense of vindication, a powerful current running through her veins that was far more satisfying than any romantic declaration. Darius introduced her to Lord and Lady Barrington with faultless courtesy, then navigated them through a few polite but brief conversations before subtly steering her towards a less crowded corridor leading to the terrace. The cool night air was a welcome balm after the heated atmosphere of the ballroom. Rebecca leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the manicured gardens bathed in moonlight. The diamonds at her throat felt heavier now, not just in weight, but in significance. "Your Grace," she began, her voice softer than she intended, "I must thank you. Your intervention was most timely." She paused, carefully choosing her words, "and more than I had reason to expect, given the nature of our arrangement." Darius stood beside her, his gaze sweeping the garden, then settling on her profile. "The nature of our arrangement," he echoed, his voice calm, "is that you are my wife and the Duchess of Crestwood. As such, you are under my protection. Any slight against you, Rebecca, is a direct affront to my house and my honor." His words were not a declaration of affection, but a statement of undeniable fact, delivered with the gravity of a signed treaty, and I do not tolerate affronts. There was no warmth in his tone, no flutter of sentiment, yet Rebecca felt a profound shift within her. Jude's charming words had always been empty, his promises fleeting. Darius offered duty, protection, and honor, and in that moment it felt infinitely more substantial. He hadn't said he loved her, or even admired her, but he had declared her his, and in doing so, he had drawn a line that no one, not even Jude Morales, would dare to cross again. "He deserved it," she said, a faint, unfamiliar smile touching her lips, "to be put in his place." Darius's gaze held hers, and for a fleeting instant she saw it, a flicker of something that might have been approval, perhaps even a hint of grim satisfaction. Indeed, a man who mistakes civility for weakness will inevitably learn the distinction the hard way. He paused, then added, his voice lowering almost imperceptibly, "What is mine, Rebecca, is inviolable, and you are mine." The possessiveness in his words, rather than feeling constricting, was oddly liberating. It was an unspoken vow, a shield against the world that once sought to diminish her. Rebecca realized then that her marriage was far more complex and infinitely more interesting than she had anticipated. It was not a tale of grand passion, but of unwavering, immovable loyalty. She had sought dignity over love, certainty over pretty lies, and in the Duke's cold, unyielding protection, in his declaration of her as mine, she found a respect that felt warmer, more enduring than any fleeting romantic sentiment Jude Morales had ever feigned. It was the first crack in his emotional facade she had witnessed, a glimpse of the fierce, unshakable core beneath the Duke's icy exterior, and for Rebecca, it was more than enough.
Years unfurled like a carefully tended tapestry, each thread woven with intention and unexpected beauty. The Duchess of Crestwood, Rebecca Macpherson, no longer thought of herself as the girl who had once sought dignity over love or certainty over pretty lies. She had found both, and something far deeper than she had ever dared to dream. The ducal households thrived under her intelligent management, becoming models of efficiency and comfort. She navigated society with an effortless grace that few could emulate, her reputation for sharp wit and unwavering composure making her an object of both admiration and occasional trepidation. With Darius at her side, she felt an unshakable confidence, a quiet power that had blossomed from the seed of their pragmatic beginning. They had 3 children, a son, Lord Alistair, who inherited his father's formidable intellect and his mother's observant eyes, and 2 daughters, Lady Eleanor and Lady Clara, who were spirited and bright, bringing laughter and a joyous chaos that softened the edges of Crestwood House. Rebecca and Darius were, without doubt, devoted parents, though their expressions of affection were often unspoken, communicated in shared glances across a nursery, a united front in matters of discipline, or the deep, quiet pride in their children's accomplishments. Their marriage, once a calculated contract, had evolved into a profound partnership. Trust, built on Darius's unwavering honesty and Rebecca's steadfast loyalty, formed its bedrock. Respect, earned daily through their shared responsibilities and mutual understanding, was its constant affirmation. The love that grew between them was not a fiery, passionate affair, but something more enduring, a deep, abiding connection born of shared purpose, unwavering support, and an unspoken intimacy that transcended words. Darius, the man once described as having ice in his veins, proved to be Rebecca's staunchest ally, her confidant, and her truest friend. His quiet presence was her sanctuary, his protection her certainty. They became, without conscious effort, the most respected couple in English society. Their influence was vast, their household impeccable, their family admired. When they entered a room, there was no longer astonishment at who the Duchess was, but reverence for who they both had become. People sought their counsel, admired their children, and aspired to the quiet strength of their union. And Jude Morales? His story had taken a predictably different turn. His marriage to Arabella Thornton, born of ambition and wealth, quickly soured. Her considerable dowry had been squandered on poor investments, mirroring Don Eduardo Guzman's mistakes, but without the prudence to recover. Arabella, accustomed to indulgence, found Jude's increasingly resentful nature and their dwindling finances a constant source of bitterness. Their life together was marked by frequent public quarrels, simmering discontent, and a glaring lack of happiness they had both believed wealth would guarantee. He had traded genuine connection for superficial gain and found himself bankrupt not only in coin, but in spirit. The last Rebecca heard, Arabella had taken their only child and retreated to her father's estates, leaving Jude a widower in all but name, forever chasing the fleeting charm that had once been his only currency. Rebecca often reflected on that day on the terrace when Darius had declared her mine. She had indeed chosen dignity over sentiment, certainty over pretty lies, but in doing so, she had discovered a love that was real, lasting, and immeasurably deep, a love that had triumphed over superficiality and proven to be the most precious, unexpected treasure of all. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for joining us on Rebecca and Darius's extraordinary journey from pragmatic arrangement to profound, unshakable love. Your presence here means everything to us. If this story touched your heart,
if Rebecca's triumph over humiliation resonated with you, if Darius's fierce protection made you believe in the power of unwavering loyalty, please take a moment to like this video. Your likes tell us that these stories matter to you. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did Rebecca's choice of dignity over romance inspire you? What did you think of Darius's devastating defense of his duchess? Have you ever had to choose practicality over sentiment? Share your reflections with our growing community of romance lovers. Please share this story with someone who needs to hear that love comes in many forms, that respect, loyalty, and partnership can be just as powerful, if not more so, than passionate declarations. Share it with anyone who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed, and needs to remember their inherent worth. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another tale of love, redemption, and triumph. Every subscription fuels our passion and motivates us to keep bringing you more emotionally rich, beautifully crafted romantic stories that celebrate love in all its forms. Your support, every like, every comment, every share, every subscription inspires us to continue creating these heartfelt narratives. You are not just viewers, you are part of our storytelling family, and your encouragement drives us to explore deeper emotions, more complex characters, and more satisfying journeys from heartbreak to happiness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in love stories that challenge conventions and celebrate the strength of the human heart.